The colony ship Horizon's promise had been humanity's hope, packed with 1,500 people seeking a new world among the stars. But space doesn't care about human dreams. A meteor storm tore through their shields, and the ship spiraled down onto a planet that wasn't supposed to be there. The crash was violent, chaotic, and terrifying. When the dust settled, people were screaming, crying, trying to find their loved ones in the wreckage. Emergency lights flickered red. The air smelled like burning metal and fear. 7-year-old Lily Carter held tight to her mother's hand as they stumbled out of the wreckage. Rebecca Carter was a teacher, not a soldier, and her hands were shaking as she tried to count heads, make sure everyone was okay. The captain was shouting orders. People were setting up emergency shelters. Someone was crying that the communication array was destroyed. In all that chaos, Lily saw something. A small animal, like a rabbit but with 6 legs and fur that glowed faintly blue in the dim light. It hopped away from the crash site, toward a dark opening in the rocky hillside nearby. Lily had always loved animals. Back on Earth, she'd rescued 3 stray cats and a bird with a broken wing. So when the creature limped, one of its legs was hurt, her heart squeezed tight. "Mom, wait," she said, tugging on Rebecca's sleeve. But Rebecca wasn't listening. She was arguing with another survivor about water supplies, her face tight with stress. Lily looked at the little creature again. It was hopping toward the cave opening, struggling. Without really thinking about it, she let go of her mother's hand and followed. Just for a minute. Just to make sure it was okay. The cave entrance was bigger than it looked from outside, tall enough for 3 men to walk through side by side. The walls were smooth, almost carved, with strange symbols etched deep into the stone. They glowed faintly, the same blue as the little creature's fur. Lily followed the animal deeper. The sounds of the crash site faded behind her. The cave twisted and turned, going down, down, down into the earth. The glowing symbols gave just enough light to see by. She should have been scared. Any other child would have turned back. But Lily was focused on that small, hurt creature ahead of her, and she'd always been the kind of kid who helped things that were broken. The tunnel opened into something impossible. A cavern so massive that Lily couldn't see the ceiling, even with all the glowing symbols lighting the walls. There were structures here, not rocks, but buildings, carved from the stone itself. Bridges that arced over dark chasms. Towers that spiraled up into darkness. And in the center of it all, something was sleeping. At first, Lily thought it was a mountain. Black stone, gleaming in the blue light. But then she saw the rhythmic rise and fall, like breathing. She saw the curve of what might be a neck, the folded shape of wings pressed against massive sides. The little creature she'd been following hopped right up to it without fear and disappeared into a crack between 2 rocks. Lily stood there, suddenly very aware that she was alone, very far from her mother, in a place that felt older than anything she'd ever imagined. The mountain moved. A massive eye opened, golden, with a pupil like a cat's, bigger than Lily's whole body. It focused on her, and Lily felt the weight of that gaze like nothing she'd ever experienced. This wasn't an animal. This was something that thought, something ancient and powerful and completely alien. She should have run. Every instinct should have screamed at her to turn and sprint back up those tunnels. But Lily was 7 years old, and she'd been through a spaceship crash, and she was lost, and she was tired, and she was scared. And sometimes when you're that overwhelmed, fear just breaks. She sat down on the stone floor and started to cry. Not dramatic crying. Just quiet tears rolling down her cheeks, because she wanted her mom, and she was cold, and everything hurt, and she didn't know how to get back. The massive creature shifted. Stone scraped against stone. The entire cavern seemed to shake. A head larger than a cargo truck lowered down, down, until it was level with Lily. She could feel the heat radiating from its scales. Could smell something like lightning and old metal. Hot breath washed over her, each exhale like standing in front of a furnace. Lily looked up into that enormous golden eye. And the dragon, because what else could it be, looked back at her. For a long moment, neither moved. Then Lily sniffled, wiped her nose with her sleeve, and said the only thing that made sense to her exhausted, frightened mind. "Can you help me find my mom?" The dragon blinked. Once. Twice. In 3,000 years of silence, no one had asked Vorthan for help. No one had looked at him with anything but terror or greed. No one had ever sat in his presence and simply cried. Like he was safe. Like he was someone who might care. Something very old and very cold in his chest began, impossibly, to warm. Vorthan had seen species rise and fall. He'd watched civilizations bloom across the stars and then collapse into dust. He'd witnessed wars that consumed entire solar systems. But he had never, in all his impossibly long life, tried to take care of something so ridiculously fragile as a human child. Lily was shivering. Her lips had a blue tint that Vorthan's ancient medical knowledge told him was dangerous. She needed warmth, hydration, treatment for the cuts on her arms and legs. She also needed her mother, but that was a problem for later. Right now, she needed to not die. And somehow, that mattered to him. He didn't understand why, but it did. He moved carefully, more carefully than he'd moved in centuries, curling his massive body around her like a living wall. Heat radiated from his scales, the same heat that had once melted starship hulls. But he controlled it, moderated it, until it was just warm enough. Lily stopped shivering almost immediately. She looked up at him with those strange, vulnerable human eyes. "You're really warm," she said, her voice still shaky. "Like a big blanket." No one had ever compared Vorthan to a blanket before. It was absurd. It was almost insulting. It made something in his chest feel strange. "Stay here," he rumbled, his voice deep enough to vibrate through the stone. He hadn't spoken aloud in so long that even he was surprised his vocal cords still worked. "Do not move." Lily nodded, too exhausted to argue. Vorthan accessed systems he hadn't touched in millennia. His lair was filled with Draken technology, medical chambers, nutrient synthesizers, environmental controls. All designed for beings 3 times Lily's size with entirely different biology. He had to improvise, adjusting settings, lowering dosages, recalibrating equipment meant for scaled skin to work on something covered in what appeared to be cloth and soft, easily damaged flesh. He synthesized water first, purified, temperature-controlled. He brought it to Lily in a container that was still far too large for her tiny hands. She had to hold it with both arms, drinking carefully. "Thank you," she said when she finished. Vorthan stared at her. Gratitude. For water. 4 basic survival necessities. Humans were strange. Over the next few hours, he worked methodically. He treated her cuts with regenerative gel that would have healed a Draken in minutes. On Lily, it would take hours, but it was better than infection. He synthesized nutrient paste that his database suggested might be compatible with human digestion. It looked unappetizing even to him, but Lily ate it without complaint. "It tastes like oatmeal," she said. "I don't really like oatmeal, but Mom says it's good for me." She talked constantly. About her mother. About the ship. About their old home on Earth where she'd had a treehouse and a cat named Professor Whiskers. About how she wanted to be a veterinarian when she grew up because animals were better than most people. Vorthan listened, though he didn't understand why she felt compelled to share all this. Draken didn't engage in what his database called small talk. They communicated information efficiently, purposefully. But Lily's chatter seemed to calm her, so he tolerated it. Then she did something that genuinely shocked him. After eating, after drinking, after her immediate medical needs were addressed, she simply curled up against his foreleg and fell asleep. Just like that. As if he weren't a being who had once commanded fleets. As if he weren't a predator large enough to swallow her whole without noticing. As if he were safe. Vorthan found himself frozen, afraid to move and wake her. He analyzed his own reaction and found it illogical. Why should he care if she woke? Why should this small, fragile creature's comfort matter to him at all? He accessed his databases, searching for information about humans. What he found fascinated him. Humans had originated on a death world, Earth, a planet with extreme temperature variations, dangerous predators, toxic plants, and diseases that should have wiped them out. They had no natural armor, no claws, no venom, no tough hide. They were born helpless and stayed that way for years, requiring constant care just to survive. By all logical standards, they should have gone extinct before they discovered fire. But they didn't. They thrived. They spread across their planet, then across the solar system, then across the stars. And Vorthan discovered why as he read deeper. Humans were persistence hunters. On Earth, they'd chase prey for hours, sometimes days, until the animal collapsed from exhaustion. They didn't give up. They couldn't be outlasted. They were social beyond any species Vorthan had encountered. They formed bonds not just with their own kind, but with other species entirely. They'd domesticated wolves into dogs, caring for them, loving them, for no practical reason except companionship. They adapted. Put a human in the desert, they'd learn to survive. Put them in the Arctic, they'd figure it out. Put them in space, and they'd build ships to take them further. They were stubborn. Impossibly, infuriatingly stubborn. When the universe said no, humans heard not yet. Lily shifted in her sleep, making a small sound. Her hand, so small it wouldn't even cover one of Vorthan's scales, clutched at his leg like she was afraid he'd disappear. Vorthan looked down at her and thought, this is what survived. This soft, fragile, persistent thing. The next day, Lily woke with more energy. The sleep and treatment had helped. She explored his lair with fearless curiosity, asking questions about everything. What were the glowing symbols? How old was he? Did he have a family? Where did everyone go? That last question struck deep, but Vorthan answered simply, they died. Long ago. I'm sorry, Lily said, and she meant it. He could hear it in her voice. She found the bioluminescent fungi growing in one corner of his lair and immediately started naming them. This one's Gerald. That one's Princess Sparkle. That big one is definitely a Morton. Why are you naming fungus? Vorthan asked, genuinely confused. Because everything deserves a name, Lily said, as if this were obvious. Don't you think Gerald looks like a Gerald? Vorthan examined the fungus. It looked like fungus. But he said, perhaps, because Lily smiled when he did. She tried to teach him a human song, something about stars and dreams that made no logical sense but had a pleasing rhythm. She drew pictures on the dusty floor with her finger, showing him her family, her cat, the ship. And slowly, impossibly, Vorthan realized something terrible, he didn't want to return her yet. Not because he couldn't, he'd located the human camp, calculated the safest route. But because for the first time in 3,000 years, his lair didn't feel like a tomb. It felt like someone was home. By the 5th day, Lily was mostly healed. The cuts had closed, the color had returned to her cheeks, and she was eating the synthesized food without complaint, though she kept suggesting that Vorthan needed to add more flavor, like maybe pizza flavor. Vorthan had no idea what pizza was, but he'd learned not to question everything the child said. He'd also been monitoring the human settlement. Their situation was stable, they'd set up basic shelters, established a perimeter, and were rationing supplies efficiently. They were searching for Lily, of course. He'd intercepted dozens of radio transmissions with her mother's voice, desperate and breaking, calling out for her daughter. Logic dictated he should return Lily immediately. Each day he kept her was another day of unnecessary suffering for her mother. It was selfish. It was wrong. But every time he prepared to tell Lily they were leaving, she'd do something that stopped him. She'd laugh at one of her own jokes. She'd show him a new drawing. She'd fall asleep against his side while he told her stories about the old Draken Empire, stories he hadn't thought about in centuries. He was being foolish. He knew it. But foolishness felt better than the alternative. On the morning of the 6th day, Vorthan made his decision. He would tell her today. They would leave at dawn tomorrow. He would return her to her people and retreat back into his solitude. It was the right thing to do. Lily, he began, his deep voice echoing through the cavern. We need to discuss. An alarm cut through his words. Not a sound, but a signal his ancient senses picked up, multiple ships dropping out of faster-than-light travel in the upper atmosphere. Military-grade engines. Weapons hot. His systems identified them immediately, Crithian raiders. Scavengers who preyed on disabled ships and vulnerable colonies. They took what they wanted, supplies, technology, people, and left nothing but wreckage behind. They were heading straight for the human settlement. Vorthan ran calculations in microseconds. The human camp had minimal defenses. Their ship's weapons were destroyed in the crash. They had maybe 15 functioning plasma rifles between all of them, and those were designed for wildlife, not military engagement. The Crithian fleet consisted of 4 assault ships and a command cruiser. The humans would be slaughtered or enslaved within the hour. This wasn't his problem. He'd hidden from galactic conflicts for 3,000 years. The time of the Draken was over. Getting involved would reveal his existence, draw attention he didn't want, potentially bring more danger to this world. The logical choice was clear, stay hidden. Protect Lily here in his lair until the Crithians left. Then return her to whatever remained of her people. What's wrong? Lily asked, noticing his sudden stillness. Vorthan looked down at her. This small human who'd wandered into his darkness and somehow brought light with her. Who'd asked him for help without fear. Who'd fallen asleep against him like he was something safe instead of something to be feared. Bad people are coming, he said finally. They want to hurt your people. Your mother. Lily's eyes went wide. My mom? But we have to help them. We have to stop the bad people. It's not that simple, Vorthan said. There are many of them. They have weapons. Ships. If I intervene. You can though, right? Lily interrupted, stepping closer to him. Her hand touched his scales. You're strong. I've seen what your technology can do. You could save them. It would be dangerous. But you could. Vorthen was silent. In his mind, he ran through scenarios. Combat strategies he hadn't considered in millennia. His weapon systems were old but functional. His armor plating could withstand most modern weaponry. His flight capability, if his wings still worked properly, would give him a massive tactical advantage. He could save them. Probably. The Crithians wouldn't expect something like him. Surprise would be his greatest weapon. But it would mean revealing himself. It would mean entering a galaxy he'd left behind. It would mean choosing a side, taking action, mattering again. It would mean risking everything for a species he'd known for less than a week. Why should I? He asked, though he wasn't really asking Lily. He was asking himself. Why should I risk everything for them? Lily looked at him with those impossibly trusting eyes. Because you're good, she said simply. I know you are. You took care of me. You didn't have to, but you did. That's what good people do, they help when someone needs it. I'm not people. I'm not even the same species as you. So? Lily shrugged. Professor Whiskers wasn't the same species as me, and I still loved him. Being different doesn't mean you can't care. Vorthen felt something crack inside his chest. This child, this impossibly fragile, impossibly stubborn child, believed in him. Believed he was good. Believed he could be more than just the last remnant of a dead species hiding in the dark. When had anyone believed in him like that? My mom tells stories, Lily continued, her voice getting stronger. About heroes. She says heroes aren't people without fear, they're people who are scared but help anyway. Because it's right. I'm not a hero, child. Maybe not yet, Lily said. But you could be. Vorthen accessed the sensor data again. The Crithian ships were entering the lower atmosphere now. 10 minutes until they reached the human settlement. 10 minutes to make a choice that would define what remained of his existence. He thought about 3,000 years of solitude. Of watching civilizations rise and fall without lifting a claw. Of convincing himself that detachment was wisdom, that isolation was safety. He thought about Lily wandering into his lair, lost and scared and asking for help. He thought about how she'd named Fungus Gerald and tried to teach him songs and fallen asleep against him like he was worth trusting. He thought about humans, this impossible species that survived everything the universe threw at them through sheer stubborn refusal to give up. This species that bonded with anything that showed them kindness, even ancient dragons in dark caves. And he thought about Rebecca, a mother he'd never met, calling desperately into the radio for a daughter who might never come home. Vorthen rose to his full height, his scales scraping against stone, his wings, ancient, powerful, unused for millennia, unfurling with a sound like thunder. Dust fell from the cavern ceiling. The ground trembled. Stay here, he commanded Lily. There's an inner chamber through that passage. It's shielded. You'll be safe. Lily's face split into a huge grin. You're going to save them. I'm going to try, Vorthen corrected. Then, more quietly, because you asked me to. He moved toward the cavern entrance, toward the surface, toward a fight he didn't have to choose. His combat systems came online one by one, weapons he'd hoped never to use again powering up with familiar warmth. Behind him, Lily called out, "Be careful." And Vorthen, last of the Draken, ancient and terrible and impossibly moved by a 7-year-old's faith in him, spread his wings and launched himself toward the sky. It was time for legends to wake. The first thing the Crithians saw was a shadow. It moved across their view screens like a cloud, except the sky had been clear moments before. Their sensors went haywire, registering something massive moving at impossible speeds. The raid commander, a scarred veteran named Thrask, leaned forward in his command chair, trying to make sense of the readings. "What is that?" he growled. "Some kind of atmospheric anomaly?" His answer came in the form of plasma fire so hot it turned the air itself white. Vorthen's first strike took out the lead assault ship's starboard engine. The vessel spun wildly, trailing smoke and debris as it crashed into the forest 3 kilometers from the human settlement. He didn't stay to watch it fall. He was already moving, wings beating once, twice, launching him toward the second ship. The Crithians finally got a visual on him. "What in the void is that?" someone screamed over the comm channel. Vorthen was a nightmare made real. Black scales that seemed to absorb light. Wings that stretched wider than their assault ships. Eyes that glowed like dying stars. He moved through the air with a grace that shouldn't have been possible for something so massive, every movement precise, controlled, lethal. He was ancient war given form. The second assault ship opened fire, plasma cannons tracking his movements. Vorthen twisted mid-flight, the blasts passing harmlessly beneath him. His own plasma breath, concentrated, superheated, evolved over millions of years, struck the ship's cockpit. The viewport melted. The ship went dark and began its death spiral toward the ground. 2 down in 30 seconds. Below, at the human settlement, people had stopped what they were doing. They stood frozen, staring up at the impossible battle happening in their sky. Children pointed. Adults grabbed weapons they knew were useless. Someone was praying. Rebecca Carter stood at the edge of the camp, her hand pressed to her mouth, tears streaming down her face. For 6 days she'd searched for her daughter. For 6 days she'd heard nothing. And now the world was ending around them, and she'd never know what happened to Lily. Then she saw it, the creature fighting for them in the sky. And something in her chest recognized the impossible truth before her mind could accept it. This thing was protecting them. Hold fire. Captain David Torres shouted to his security team. Don't shoot at it. It's attacking the raiders, not us. The third and fourth assault ships had regrouped, flying in formation, coordinating their attack. They'd dealt with hostile fauna before, with territorial beasts that defended their territory. This was just a very large, very dangerous animal. Animals could be killed. They were wrong. Vorthen had fought in the Draken Wars, conflicts so vast they'd reshaped entire sectors of the galaxy. He'd commanded battle fleets, designed strategies that were still taught in military academies across dozens civilizations, though none of them knew where those strategies had originated. He had literally invented tactics these raiders had never imagined. He dove toward the planet's surface, pulling the 2 ships into pursuit. They followed, weapons blazing. Vorthen waited until the last possible second, then pulled up hard, his wings catching air, reversing direction with impossible speed. The 2 Crithian ships couldn't adjust in time. They slammed into each other with a sound like thunder, metal shrieking against metal. Both spiraled down, their crews screaming. That left the command cruiser. Thrask watched his entire assault force destroyed in under 2 minutes. His hands were shaking on the controls. In 30 years of raiding, he'd never seen anything like this. The creature was circling now, gaining altitude, preparing for another attack. Retreat, he shouted to his helmsman. Get us out of. Vorthen struck from above, claws that could tear through starship hulls raking across the cruiser's dorsal armor. Shields sparked and failed. Hull plating peeled away like paper. The command cruiser's main weapon, a plasma cannon designed to crack planetary defenses, swiveled toward him. At this range, even Vorthen's armor might not hold. He didn't give them the chance to fire. His jaws, filled with teeth like swords, backed by bite force that could snap titanium, clamped down on the weapon's barrel. He twisted, wrenched, tore. The cannon exploded in a shower of sparks and molten metal. The cruiser was crippled, listing badly, emergency alarms blaring through its corridors. Thrask hit the emergency escape, his pod launching from the dying ship and rocketing toward orbit. His crew wouldn't be so lucky. Vorthen could have pursued. Could have hunted down every single Crithian, ensured none escaped to report what they'd seen. But he was tired. His wings ached, millennia of disuse couldn't be overcome in one battle. His systems were overheating. And more importantly, he'd done what he came to do, the humans were safe. He let the command cruiser limp away into the upper atmosphere, its engines barely functional, no threat to anyone. Let them tell their stories. Let the galaxy know something ancient still dwelt on this world. Maybe it would keep others away. Vorthen turned and descended toward the human settlement. The landing was not graceful. He struck the ground hard enough to crack stone, his legs trembling, pain signals flashing through his neural network. A plate of armor on his left flank was scorched and damaged. One of the plasma blasts had gotten through. Regenerative gel leaked from the wound, mixing with his blood, which glowed faintly blue in the fading light. The humans stared at him. Dozens of them, forming a semicircle, keeping their distance. He could see fear in their eyes, uncertainty. They didn't know if he was a savior or just a different kind of threat. Then someone pushed through the crowd. Lily? Rebecca's voice was hoarse from 6 days of calling her daughter's name. But now she was shouting for a different reason. Lily. The little girl came running from the direction of the caves, having disobeyed Vorthen's order to stay hidden the moment the fighting stopped. She sprinted past the adults, past the weapons, past the fear, and ran straight to Vorthen. You did it, she shouted, her voice filled with pure joy. You saved everyone. She placed her tiny hand on his snout, right between his eyes, completely unafraid. The humans watched a 7-year-old girl touch a creature of legend like he was a pet. Watched that creature, wounded, exhausted, powerful enough to destroy ships with his bare claws, lower his massive head and close his eyes at her touch like it brought him peace. Lily, Rebecca breathed, tears flowing freely now. She took a hesitant step forward. Baby, get away from. It's okay, Mom. Lily turned, smiling. This is Vorthan. He's my friend. He took care of me. And he saved you. Vorthan opened one golden eye, focusing on Rebecca. He could see Lily in her features, the same eyes, the same stubborn set to the jaw. Your daughter, he rumbled, his voice like distant thunder, is braver than most warriors I've known. Rebecca stared at this impossible creature. At her daughter, alive and healthy and treating a dragon like a beloved pet. At the burning wreckage of raider ships scattered across the landscape. She did what any human would do, she adapted. Thank you, she said, her voice shaking. Thank you for protecting her. Thank you for saving us. Vorthan tried to respond, but his legs gave out. The adrenaline was fading, the damage catching up to him. He collapsed onto his side with a groan that shook the ground. His hurt. Lily cried. Captain Torres stepped forward, his tactical mind already working through the problem. Get Dr. Patterson. And someone bring the medical supplies from storage. All of them. Sir, one of his officers said hesitantly, we don't know anything about his biology. Then we learn, Torres cut him off. Fast. That thing saved all our lives. We don't let it die on our watch. And humanity did what it always did best. Faced with the impossible, they improvised. Dr. Amanda Patterson had treated broken bones, infections, radiation burns, and every complication that came with deep space travel. But she'd never treated a dragon. She stood in front of Vorthan's wounded side, medical scanner in hand, trying to make sense of readings that looked more like a starship's power core than a living creature. His blood, if you could call it blood, carried nanomachines that were actively trying to repair damage. His scales were layered with some kind of energy-reactive compound. His internal temperature was hot enough to boil water. This is insane, she muttered, but her hand stayed steady. Okay, big guy. I need you to tell me where it hurts most. Vorthan's eye focused on her. This human was different from Lily, older, more cautious, but with the same determination. The left ventral plating, he rumbled. The plasma blast penetrated deeper than my regeneration can handle alone. Can you open your medical database? Let us see what we're working with. It was a strange thing, sharing knowledge across species. But Vorthan projected a holographic display from his internal systems, showing his anatomy, his repair mechanisms, where the damage was worst. The humans gathered around, engineers and medics working together, asking questions, adapting human medicine to alien biology. They worked through the night. Someone rigged a portable generator to boost Vorthan's failing regeneration systems. Rebecca, who'd studied biochemistry before becoming a teacher, synthesized a compound that could temporarily patch his damaged scales. A teenage boy named Tyler, who was a tech genius back on Earth, figured out how to interface human computers with Vorthan's ancient medical systems. It shouldn't have worked. The technology was thousands of years apart, the biology completely incompatible. But humans were really, really good at making things work that had no business working. Lily stayed by Vorthan's head the entire time, talking to him, keeping him conscious. She told him about the settlement, about the people. That's Mom, you met her. She's really smart. And that's Captain Torres, he was in the military but is actually nice. And that's Mrs. Chen, she makes the best food from nothing, you'd like her. Vorthan listened, his massive chest rising and falling more steadily as the humans worked their strange magic. He'd saved them, and now they were saving him. The symmetry of it felt right somehow. By dawn, the worst of the damage was repaired. Vorthan's systems were stable, his regeneration working properly again. He would need time to fully heal, but he would live. Dr. Patterson sat down heavily on a rock, exhausted. I just performed surgery on a dragon, she said to no one in particular. I need to write this down before I forget, because no one will ever believe me. Over the following weeks, something remarkable happened. The settlement grew around Vorthan's presence. At first, people were nervous, he was enormous, powerful, alien. But Lily was their bridge. She showed them he was safe by being completely unafraid. Other children followed her lead. A boy named Kevin, who was 8 and had lost his father in the crash, started bringing Vorthan questions about the stars. Vorthan found himself explaining navigation, showing the child constellations that humanity hadn't named yet. A girl named Hannah, who was shy and barely spoke, would sit near him in the evenings and draw. She never showed him the pictures, but he noticed she was drawing him, not as a monster, but as a guardian watching over the settlement. The adults came more slowly, but they came. Captain Torres asked about the sector's history, about threats the humans didn't know existed yet. Vorthan told him about the old territorial boundaries, about species to avoid, about safe routes through dangerous space. Rebecca brought him human literature, stories, poems, histories. If you're going to live with us, she said, you should understand us better. Vorthan read everything she gave him. He was fascinated by human stories. They were so often about overcoming impossible odds, about small people doing great things, about found families and second chances. He was starting to understand why humanity had spread so far despite being so fragile. They never gave up. Not on themselves, not on each other, and apparently, not on ancient dragons who crashed into their lives. The settlement adapted around him. Engineers designed structures that incorporated his lair into the growing colony. Someone, Tyler, probably, set up a communication system so Vorthan could speak to different parts of the settlement without having to move his still healing body. Vorthan shared his technology carefully. The synthesizers that could produce food and water. Shield generators that would protect the settlement from orbital threats. Medical systems that could treat human injuries far better than their crashed ship's equipment. In return, humans taught him things his databases had never captured. How to make music, real music, not just recorded sounds. How to laugh at jokes that made no logical sense but were funny anyway. How to play games with children who invented rules as they went along. 3 months after the crash, the settlement had transformed. What had been a desperate survival camp was now a thriving colony. They'd named it New Haven, and at its heart, in a cabin connected to living spaces and greenhouses and workshops, lived Vorthan. One evening, as the settlement's first harvest celebration was happening, humans dancing and singing and sharing food under the stars, Lily climbed up to where Vorthan rested and sat beside his head. "Are you happy?" she asked simply. Vorthan considered the question. He listened to the music, the laughter, the sound of life happening all around him. He thought about Kevin, who now called him Professor Vorthan when asking questions. About Hannah, who'd finally shown him her drawings, and they were beautiful. About Rebecca, who'd started teaching him human philosophy. About Dr. Patterson, who argued with him about medical theory at least once a week. About Lily, who'd walked into his darkness and refused to let him stay there. "I didn't know I could be," he said finally. "For 3,000 years, I thought happiness was something I'd lost forever. I thought I was just waiting to fade away. But you're not anymore." "No." He lowered his head so he could see her better. "You changed that. All of you. You humans with your impossible stubbornness and your refusal to leave anyone behind." Lily grinned. "Does that mean you're staying? Really staying?" Vorthan looked out at New Haven, at this community that had grown around him, that had accepted him, that had made space for something as strange as him in their lives. He thought about leaving, about returning to his solitude. The idea felt wrong. Empty. "If you'll have me," he said, echoing words from a conversation that felt like a lifetime ago. "Your family now," Lily said, leaning against his scales. "That's what you do with family. You stay." And Vorthan understood, finally, what humans had known all along: home wasn't a place. It wasn't a planet or a settlement or even a lair filled with ancient technology. Home was wherever people looked at you and decided you belonged. Years later, when New Haven had grown into a proper city and humanity had spread across 3 continents of the planet, children would ask about the dragon who lived among them. They'd ask if he was scary, if he was dangerous. And their parents would tell them, once, maybe. But a little girl got lost in the dark, and she asked him for help. And he remembered what it meant to care. That's the thing about humans, we don't just save ourselves. We bring everyone we can with us into the light. Even ancient dragons who'd forgotten they had hearts worth saving. Especially them.